The official history of Metroidvania is here at last. Look, it even has an official logo.
Nintendo, defend the planet Xephus against the evil Mother Brain.
So this is another one of those episodes where I tell you that I've launched another book. This time a print companion to the video series Metroidvania Works. But Jeremy, you say, you just published those 3 big NES-era books last fall. Slow your roll, man. This is not a chat GPT-crafted YouTube apology video where I say, I hear you, I recognize your frustration, I will do better because you deserve better. Nah, no apologies here. The proximity of these books is just one of those things that happens sometimes. See, I finished up and submitted this Metroidvania book about 2 years ago, but this one went through a little bit of a different process than usual. Instead of publishing it through a small boutique label, I worked on this one with the folks at Dark Horse Publishing. That's right, a real honest-to-God publisher. This means you should be able to find this book at any bookstore or comic shop within the Dark Horse distribution network, which is pretty much all of them, or at least the ones where the buyer was cool and smart enough to say, damn, this book looks amazing, I need to stock this here. This also means that it's a more robustly overhauled book than anything that I've published before. This book began life as the Metroidvania Works or Metroidvania Chronicles video series, yes, but this is no simple collection of YouTube scripts. I've increasingly moved toward rewriting and expanding my YouTube content for print over the past few volumes that I've published, but with this one I went the extra mile. I rewrote every entry in the book from top to bottom, and I also added a ton of new supplemental content, as well as articles about games that were not included in the original video series. Remember that I kicked off the Metroidvania Works Metroidvania Chronicles video series back in 2014, and it took me a full decade of sporadic stop-start publication before I finally hit a point where I could stop, pull everything together, and create a book. And in that time, my approach to video and to the overall chronology concept evolved quite a bit. This Metroidvania Works companion book reflects that evolution. It's given me a chance to revisit that chronology with a more consistent voice and mission, and I've created, in my opinion, a pretty comprehensive overview of how the inspirations and influences that defined the genre came together through various facets and threads throughout the 1980s. This is not simply a chronology of Metroidvania games. In fact, you could argue, although I disagree, that there were no proper Metroidvania games at all in the 1980s. No, like the video series, the book touches on the many concepts and threads that came together to give us the Metroidvania format, which ultimately are a specific kind of action RPG. It is, by nature, a pretty wonkish effort, drilling deeply into design principles and play mechanics that came together to create a very specific facet of the action RPG genre. And since this book is being better distributed and therefore is a more potentially mass market appealing kind of project than anything that I've put together before, I did try to make it a little more accessible. That doesn't mean that I dumbed it down though. It simply means that I've added a lot of supporting material to help clarify terminology and fight against my own assumption that the reader necessarily has an encyclopedic knowledge of video game history. That's also why I didn't call the book Metroidvania Works, but rather The History of Metroidvania. It seemed a little more self-explanatory, or at least as self-explanatory as anything with a jargony word like Metroidvania in the title. Inside the book, I've broken down the chronology by years. And each year includes a timeline of notable Metroidvania-related events. Not just the release dates of games cited and covered inside the book, but also the launches of new platforms, as well as notable game industry-level events. I've also written a few articles about games that decidedly don't belong in a Metroidvania analysis, but that help to shape the bigger picture of things. So for example, the original Donkey Kong appears early in the book, as it did in the video series, because that game pretty much defined how platform action titles worked, and you don't get Metroidvania without platform action. For the book, I've also bookended the genre's first decade by looking at Super Mario World, and how it demonstrates the way that action RPG elements had become embedded in even linear action games. In fact, let's read a fun book excerpt together, shall we? Another Mario game? Yes, this book wouldn't be complete without a look at one final descendant of Donkey Kong, which shipped in Japan alongside the 16-bit Super Famicom in November of 1990. After Super Mario Bros. 3 more or less proclaimed the demise of Metroidvania evolution on 8-bit consoles by demonstrating the appeal of a well-designed platform action game with no persistence and no aspirations of role-playing elements, Super Mario World presents a peace offering. Despite consisting of several dozen linear, standalone action stages, Mario's first 16-bit adventure took place in, as the title indicates, a world. Completing stages in Super Mario World doesn't simply move our hero another step closer to his goal of rescuing the princess once again, it also opens new paths throughout that world. Mario's progress here unfolds visually through a world map, which expands on the simple board game-like level selection spaces of Super Mario Bros. 3 to become a single interconnected realm that shifts and transforms over the course of the quest. Complete a stage and multiple paths may open as a bridge collapses or a cliff crumbles, with the built-in save battery recording Mario's impact on the world permanently across play sessions. Completing certain tasks affects lasting change within the levels you play, creating new blocks that act as platforms, barriers, or power-up opportunities. And on top of that, many levels contain multiple exits, inviting you to replay those stages in an exploratory mindset. It's not a proper Metroidvania, mind you. Mario himself never grows in capabilities beyond whatever power-ups he manages to snag along the way, and those powers vanish immediately if Mario dies or takes damage from an enemy. Much of his progress, and uncovering most secrets, depends not only on his innate powers, but rather on the assistance of his trusty dinosaur pal Yoshi, whose additional skills expand Mario's moves, especially when used with the temporary power-ups you collect. Still, despite its fundamental lack of character growth in its subdivided world, Super Mario World incorporates a proper quest-like structure to its otherwise pure action. This format would become the template for action games half a decade later, as 3D platformers further blurred the boundary between the concepts of action and adventure. My goal with the Metroidvania Works print companion is to create a proper chronology for the format. A point that was admittedly jumbled in my video series, which clumsily jumped back and forth in time as I realized I had overlooked details or titles. My excellent editor at Dark Horse, Rachel Lapido, helped me wrangle the timeline into proper order, which in turn forced me to reconsider the connections between different entries and different genres. Note that this is not a comprehensive index of every single game from the 1980s that demonstrated some inkling of Metroidvania thinking. I'd still be writing if I had attempted to wrangle every single obscure Japanese or European computer game that flirted with folding RPG elements and adventure components into an action milieu. It's also not an attempt to identify which game did what first. I found that trying to define firsts in video gaming is a fool's errand, because someone will always point out some example until you ultimately wind your way back in time to Tennis for Two. Rather, what I've tried to do is identify games both major and minor that, to my mind, really embody the design innovations and aspirations that led to, say, Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Many of these are games that sold well and attracted imitators to build on their concepts. But I've also tried to celebrate creative dead ends while charting the increasingly divergent evolution of similar related genres that didn't evolve, jumping around on different platforms. Metroidvania Works' the first decade begins in 1980 with the arrival of the home computer version of Zork, itself a 1977-ish sort of game. And it ends in autumn 1990 with The Secret of Monkey Island for PC. Of course, no one would ever mistake Monkey Island for a Metroidvania, but the Metroidvania genre owes a lot to PC adventure games. And Monkey Island features a lot of concepts and mechanics that feel fully in sync with Metroidvania evolution, including a persistent hub world that you spend a lot of time in as it evolves. I've also added a lot of entries about computer games that I had previously overlooked, including Below the Root and Dizzy, the Egg Adventure. There are a few additional entries for console and arcade games that tried with varying degrees of success to do the Metroidvania thing in their own way, including Captain Comic and the strange Famicom version of Mugen Senshi Valis. In fact, let's do another reading, shall we? Largely overlooked by chroniclers of video game history, the Famicom release of Nihon Telenet's classic Mugen Senshi Valis strayed dramatically from better-known counterparts for more advanced systems like TurboGrafx-16 and PC-8801. Perhaps to compensate for the relatively meager capabilities of the Famicom, the designers behind this adaptation ditched the original game's straightforward and highly linear design in favor of a rudimentary take on an open-world adventure. Valis for Famicom resembles its counterparts in the broad strokes. For example, it begins in a modern cityscape in which protagonist Yuko runs around in her school uniform before transporting her to a mysterious fantasy world in which she dons bikini armor. But where those other versions play out across a series of fast-scrolling stages that can be conquered by dashing left to right and destroying everything in your path, this iteration changes things up from the start. The opening metropolis requires Yuko to duck into buildings and explore the interconnected backgrounds so as to find the shrine that transports her to another realm. And once there, she needs to traverse forests and caverns in search of weapons and tools to aid her in her journey to collect the mystical jewels that comprise the backbone of her quest. As a point of comparison, it plays a great deal like Rygar and the Goonies 2, both of which would make their debut for Famicom about half a year after Valis. But where those games tend to be well loved by fans, the Famicom version of Valis largely goes overlooked, and not only because it never managed to make its way outside the confines of Japan. Despite its designer's noble intents, this take on Valis doesn't quite hold together as an action RPG. The controls feel a little too slippery, the action a little too punishing, the objectives a little too vague. Unlike the exploratory platformers that would follow soon after, Valis suffers from the awkwardness shared by many early Famicom releases that attempt to go beyond the single-screen arcade experience. The tech and collective programming expertise didn't quite match the ambition on display. Metroidvania: The First Decade is available now at every bookstore worth a damn. This is the new measure of quality for your favorite bookstore. Consider it the definitive edition of the Metroidvania Works series so far. Also, it's a chance for the weirdos who get really mad at me because they think I came up with the word Metroidvania, I didn't, to get even madder at me. I have no idea if this book will sell at all, or if it will be a huge flop, but I'm hoping for the best. Which is why I built the potential for future follow-up volumes right into the title. Decade 1, it says. I plan to begin publishing episodes in the second decade of Metroidvania Works soon. And this time I'll have things planned out and expressed more consistently right from the start. I'll also be publishing the contents of this book at Metroidvania.com from time to time. So that's my pitch. You are not legally or morally obligated to pick up this book. But if you like thinking about Metroidvania games, and really, who doesn't, you'll enjoy this print companion to the very video series that you're watching right now. Next time on Metroidvania Works, every book needs an errata section. Actually, we can start here. Huge but accidentally uncredited thanks to Amanda Nepris for her excellent, all-encompassing illustration for the book cover.